A captain's last order should preserve his ship, not destroy it. But on the morning of February 7, 1943, Lieutenant Commander James Halvorsen gave an instruction that seemed to violate every principle of seamanship. Full ahead, course 095, toward the coral shelf 3 miles northeast of Rendova Island. His destroyer, USS Kendrick, was taking water faster than her pumps could expel it. The torpedo that struck her portside at frame 97 had opened the forward engine room to the sea. The bulkhead at frame 86 was holding, but barely. Engineering reported 4 feet of standing water in the forward fireroom, and it was rising 6 inches every 12 minutes, despite 3 portable pumps running at capacity. This isn't speculation. The sequence is preserved in Bureau of Ships War Damage Report 47, declassified in 1978 and archived at the National Archives facility in College Park, Maryland. What follows is reconstructed from damage control logs, witness statements, and the technical assessment compiled by naval architects who examined Kendrick's hull 3 weeks after the incident. The question wasn't whether Kendrick would sink. The question was where. In deep water, 1,500 men in a task force would watch her slip beneath the surface, her watertight doors sealed, her crew in life jackets, another Fletcher-class hull added to the casualty lists. Or on a coral shelf in 60 feet of water, grounded, stabilized, and possibly salvageable. Halvorsen chose the shelf. His executive officer thought he'd lost his mind. Rendova Harbor, Solomon Islands, 0540 hours. The light is gray and wet, the kind that makes the horizon disappear into mist. You're standing on the bridge wing of a Fletcher-class destroyer, 376 feet of welded steel moving at 4 knots through water that looks like hammered lead. The island is a dark mass to starboard. Behind you, the fire control director turns slowly, tracking nothing, its crew silent inside. The bridge smells like coffee, oil, and salt. The deck vibrates, not the steady thrum of healthy turbines, but something irregular, a hesitation every third beat. The chief engineer's voice comes through the sound-powered phone, flat and exact. Forward engine room flooded to waterline, forward fire room 4 feet and rising, bulkhead 8-6 holding but distorted from blast pressure. Pumps keeping pace in fire room but cannot gain ground. Estimate 20 minutes before water reaches boiler bases. Halvorsen doesn't respond immediately. He's looking at the chart table, at the penciled line showing their track, at the depth soundings marked in fathoms, 62, 58, 55. The coral shelf starts at 45 feet and rises gradually toward shore. The tide is coming in, high water at 0715. The chronometer reads 0542. The routine of a Fletcher-class destroyer in the Solomons is this: patrol, bombard, escort, patrol. Kendrick had been on her 38th such cycle when the torpedo found her. She'd left Tulagi at 2200 the previous evening with orders to join Task Force 18 for a pre-dawn bombardment of Japanese positions on Kolombangara. 4 destroyers, no capital ships, running dark through Blackett Strait. The torpedo came from port, 0215 hours. No sonar contact beforehand, just the white track in the water, visible for perhaps 8 seconds in the moonlight, and then the impact. The explosion lifted the port side 18 inches and twisted the hull 7 degrees to starboard. The forward engine room was breached instantly. Seawater entered at an estimated 800 gallons per second through a rupture between frames 89 and 106. According to damage control procedures outlined in Bureau of Ships Manual, BR 2200, Section 4, Paragraph 12, the first action after underwater explosion is to establish flooding boundaries. The damage control party did this in under 3 minutes. They sealed bulkhead 8-6 from both sides, secured all watertight doors forward of frame 80, and started the portable gasoline-driven handy billy pumps. Standard equipment, 360-gallon-per-minute pumps, designation P60, manufactured by Homelight Corporation. The pumps are loud, temperamental, and essential. They break down every 40 minutes on average and must be restarted by hand. By 0230, the situation was stable. Forward engine room lost, forward fire room flooding but controlled. Main propulsion available from after engine room only. Speed restricted to 12 knots to prevent hull flexing. Bulkhead 8-6 under observation. Then, at 0510, someone in the forward fireroom noticed the water rising faster. The pump intake on the port side had clogged with debris, insulation, paint chips, small caliber ammunition casings blown through ventilation ducts by the blast. The men cleared it, but the delay cost them 18 inches of freeboard in that compartment. The bilge pump suction was now underwater. They lost the fixed pump and had to rely entirely on the portables. That's when Halvorsen started looking at the chart. The executive officer's name was Lieutenant Philip Graves. He'd been with Kendrick since her commissioning 10 months earlier. Before the war, he taught mathematics at a high school in Portland, Oregon. He understood numbers. He understood vectors and rates and probabilities. He looked at the same chart Halvorsen was studying and reached a different conclusion. "We make for Tulagi," Graves said. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. "Emergency speed on one screw, 40 miles. We can make it in 4 hours if the bulkhead holds." Halvorsen shook his head. "The bulkhead won't hold. Engineering says it's stable. Engineering says it's distorted. Blast pressure. You read the same report. Distorted doesn't mean failing. Doesn't mean secure either." Graves leaned over the chart. "If we beach her, we lose her. If we run for Tulagi and the bulkhead goes, we lose her in 1,500 feet of water. I lose the ship and maybe half the crew. If the bulkhead holds..." "Phil," Halvorsen's tone changed, not louder, but harder. "That bulkhead is 18 feet from a detonation point with a warhead equivalent to 860 pounds of TNT. I've read the damage reports from Hambleton, Bristol, Beatty. Hambleton survived because the bulkhead held, and she had good weather and she was close to a safe anchorage. Bristol broke in two. Beatty broke in two. Same class ship, same machinery space hit. The difference was progressive flooding." Graves said nothing. "We're not running to Tulagi," Halvorsen said. "We're putting her on the shelf." The helmsman, a third-class quartermaster named Dvorak, glanced at them and then back at the compass. The navigator, Ensign William Chen, marked the chart without comment. Outside the bridge windows, the island grew slightly more distinct as dawn approached. The decision to beach a warship is not covered in any manual. Fleet instructions describe damage control, firefighting, abandoned ship procedures. They do not describe intentional grounding. It is considered an admission of defeat, a destruction of naval property, a violation of the fundamental principle that a ship must remain mobile to be useful. But there is precedent. At Pearl Harbor, USS Nevada was torpedoed and bombed and deliberately run aground at Hospital Point to prevent her from sinking in the channel. She was later refloated, repaired, and returned to service. She fought at Normandy and Iwo Jima and Okinawa. The decision to beach her saved her. Halvorsen knew this. Every naval officer who'd entered the service after December 7, 1941, knew this. But Nevada was a battleship with a 29,000-ton displacement and the resources of Pearl Harbor Navy Yard available for salvage. Kendrick was a destroyer with a full-load displacement of 3,000 tons, and the nearest repair facility was 600 miles away in Espiritu Santo. Still, 60 feet of water is survivable. 1,500 feet is not. At 0555, Halvorsen gave the order. "Engine room, make turns for 15 knots, steady on course 095. The reply came back immediately. "Sir, engineering recommends against speed above 8 knots, hull stress concerns." "Noted. Make turns for 15 knots. "Aye, sir, answering 15 knots. The vibration changed, deeper, faster, with a kind of grinding undertone that hadn't been there before. The steel hull flexing, the damaged section working against the rest of the ship. Graves stepped closer. "Skipper." "I know," Halvorsen said. "If the bulkhead fails at speed, then it fails 30 seconds earlier than if we'd been doing 8 knots and we're 30 seconds closer to shallow water. I'll take that trade." The island was 2 miles off. The coral shelf began at 45 feet according to the chart, but charts in the Solomons were notoriously unreliable. Most soundings dated from 1890s British surveys. Depths could vary by 10 feet depending on coral growth and sea floor shifts. Halvorsen watched the fathometer. 60 feet, 58, 56. At 0603, the sound-powered phone buzzed. Engineering again. Bridge, fireroom reports water at 5 feet 6 inches. Pump number 2 has failed, unable to restart. Water now at boiler base level. Graves looked at Halvorsen. Halvorsen looked at the fathometer, 52 feet. Increase speed to 20 knots, Halvorsen said. Graves actually stepped back as if the order had physical force. Jim, no, that'll rip her apart. It'll get us there faster. The stress on that bulkhead is already catastrophic. Another 5 knots won't change it, but another 90 seconds might. Halvorsen turned to the helmsman. Dvorak, when I give the word, put the rudder hard right. We're going to hit that shelf bow first at an angle. I want the keel to bite, not slide. Dvorak's voice was steady. Aye, sir. Hard right on your command. The speed increased. 20 knots now, the hull shuddering like something alive and struggling. The water ahead showed texture, lighter patches where the coral was close to the surface, darker channels where it dropped away. Halvorsen was steering for a light patch 800 yards ahead, 50 feet, 48, 46. Hard right rudder! The ship heeled, the bow swung, and for a moment everything was just sound. The roar of water, the scream of turbines, the deep metallic groan of the hull. Then impact. The bow struck coral at 19 knots. The forward third of the keel bit into the shelf and held. The stern swung around, driven by momentum and the rudder angle, until the ship was canted 30 degrees to starboard and angled slightly bow up. The impact drove the bow down another 4 feet, burying it into sand and coral fragments. The turbines were cut immediately. The sudden stop threw everyone forward. Men fell, equipment slid. In the forward fireroom, the water surged aft and then forward again, a wave that slammed against the distorted bulkhead at frame 86. The bulkhead held. For 15 seconds, there was silence. Then, voices. Damage reports, status checks, the ordered chaos of men confirming they were alive and the ship was still beneath them. Halvorsen stood slowly, one hand on the chart table. His other hand hurt. He looked at it and saw blood. He'd cut it on something during the impact, a corner of metal, a protruding bolt. It didn't matter. All compartments, report status, he said into the sound-powered phone. The reports came back. Forward engine room still flooded. Forward fireroom flooding stopped. Water level at 5 feet 8 inches. Bulkhead 8-6 intact but under visible stress. After engine room dry, after fireroom dry, main machinery spaces secure, no casualties, minor injuries only. The ship was grounded, bow buried in coral, stern afloat in 40 feet of water. She wasn't sinking anymore. The salvage assessment came 3 weeks later. A team from Espiritu Santo arrived with divers, cutting torches, portable pumps larger than anything Kendrick carried, and a floating dry dock section that could be positioned under the stern. The forward engine room was declared a total loss. The forward fire room was repairable. Bulkhead 86 was cracked in 3 places, but had not failed. The Bureau of Ships report included this line: the decision to intentionally ground the vessel, while unconventional, prevented total loss and allowed for salvage in circumstances where conventional damage control measures would likely have been insufficient. Unconventional. That was the word they used. Halvorsen used a different word. He called it obvious. The math was simple. Sink in deep water, total loss. Ground in shallow water, possible salvage. The only question was whether he had the time to reach the shallow water before the ship reached the point of no return. The bulkhead answered that question. It held just long enough. The repair took 6 weeks. Kendrick was refloated on March 20th, towed to Espiritu Santo, patched, and sent on to Pearl Harbor for complete reconstruction. She returned to service in July with a new forward engine room, new forward fire room, and a reinforced bulkhead at frame 86. She earned 7 more battle stars before the war ended. She was present at Leyte Gulf and Okinawa. She was decommissioned in 1947 and sold for scrap in 1974. The official record lists her commanding officer during the Rendova incident as Lieutenant Commander James Halvorsen, promoted to commander 6 months later. His fitness reports include this notation from his squadron commander: officer demonstrated exceptional judgment in crisis conditions, prioritizing mission preservation over procedural conformity. That's the bureaucratic translation. The crew had a different phrase. They said the old man was stubborn as coral and twice as hard. They said he'd rather wreck his ship on purpose than let the sea wreck it by accident. They said he calculated the odds and made a decision that wasn't in any manual, because manuals don't cover situations where all the good options are gone and only bad options remain. There's a technical name for what Halvorsen did. Naval architects call it controlled grounding. The idea is that if a ship must sink, it should sink in a location that maximizes salvage potential. Shallow water, stable bottom, protected anchorage. The difficulty is that controlled grounding requires three things: accurate navigation, precise speed control, and time. Ships in crisis rarely have all three. Kendrick had by navigation. Chen's charts were accurate enough to identify the coral shelf. She had speed control. The after-engine room gave Halvorsen the knots he needed. What she didn't have was time. The bulkhead at frame 86 was failing. Not catastrophically, not all at once, but incrementally, in a way that would become irreversible if the water level reached certain critical points. The engineering report estimated that bulkhead had perhaps 20 minutes of integrity remaining when Halvorsen made his decision to beach. The transit time to the coral shelf at 15 knots was 11 minutes. At 8 knots, the recommended maximum given hull stress, it would have been 21 minutes. 21 is greater than 20. That arithmetic decided the outcome. Halvorsen pushed the ship beyond safe parameters because safe parameters guaranteed failure. Unsafe parameters offered a possibility of success. He chose possibility over certainty, risk over procedure. The executive officer, Lieutenant Graves, requested transfer after Kendrick returned to service. He cited personal reasons. Those reasons were never specified in official correspondence, but men who served with both officers said Graves could not reconcile his understanding of proper seamanship with what Halvorsen had done. Graves saw recklessness. Halvorsen saw mathematics. Both were correct. Two details from the incident deserve mention, small things that mattered. First, the coral shelf. The charts showed 45 feet depth, but when divers surveyed the grounded destroyer, they found the shelf actually started at 48 feet and had an inconsistent profile. Some sections as shallow as 30 feet, others dropping to 60. Kendrick's bow struck one of the shallow sections, 8 feet to port. The depth was 55 feet, insufficient to arrest her momentum. 8 feet to starboard, the depth was 32 feet, which would have torn the bottom out of the hull. Halvorsen had aimed for a target that existed within an 8-foot margin of error and had no way to verify its location, except a chart drawn in 1896. The fact that he hit the right spot was partly skill, partly luck, and partly because the alternative was unacceptable, so he proceeded as if the chart were correct and the margin were infinite. Second, the pumps. The 3 portable gasoline-driven pumps that kept the forward fire room from flooding completely were called Handy Billies, designated P60, manufactured by Homelight Corporation of Port Chester, New York. Each unit weighed 160 pounds, produced 60 gallons per minute at maximum capacity, and required manual starting with a pull cord. The engines ran on gasoline, stored in 1-gallon tanks mounted on the frame. The machines were loud, vibration-prone, and essential. The destroyer's allowance was 3 P60 pumps. When pump number 2 failed at 0603, the crew had 2 remaining. If a third pump had failed, water would have reached the boiler bases before Kendrick reached the coral shelf. The decision to beach would have been correct, but the execution would have been impossible because the boilers would have been flooded and the turbines stopped and the ship dead in the water. 2 pumps kept running. The ship kept moving. The bulkhead held. That's all. No drama, just machinery that worked the way it was designed to work, long enough to reach shallow water. The photograph exists in the National Archives, catalog number 80 G471215. It shows Kendrick aground at Rendova, taken from a patrol craft at approximately 0900 hours on February 7th. The bow is buried in coral, the stern afloat, the ship canted to starboard. Men are visible on deck, small figures moving with purpose. Smoke rises from the afterstack, boilers still burning, power still available. The sky is overcast, the water is gray. What the photograph does not show, the sound of pumps running below decks, the smell of fuel oil and salt, the feeling in the hull of being simultaneously grounded and afloat, stable and precarious. What the photograph does not show: Lieutenant Commander Halvorsen standing on the bridge wing, looking at the waterline, calculating how many hours until high tide, when the stern would rise slightly and the bow would settle further, compressing the coral, making the grounding more secure. What the photograph does not show: the men in the forward fire room, still pumping, still clearing debris from intake screens, still monitoring the bulkhead at frame 86, which now had visible cracks but was not leaking, which was distorted but was holding, which represented the difference between salvage and loss. The photograph shows a ship. It does not show the arithmetic that saved her. 60 feet of water is shallow enough to work in. Divers can reach the hull. Pumps can be positioned. Patches can be welded. A ship grounded in 60 feet can be refloated if the damage is containable and the weather holds and the coral doesn't tear the bottom out during the refloating process. 1,500 feet of water is too deep for anything. A ship that sinks in 1,500 feet is gone. The crew can be rescued if there's time. The hull cannot be recovered. It becomes a coordinate, a notation on a casualty list, a name added to the memorial plaques at the Naval Academy. Halvorsen understood this. His officers understood this. The men operating the pumps understood this. The choice wasn't between saving the ship safely and saving the ship dangerously. The choice was between trying something dangerous and accepting certain loss. That's what the manual doesn't cover. The manual assumes there's always a procedurally correct option. When all options are procedurally incorrect, you choose the one that offers the best outcome and accept the consequences. The consequence of beaching Kendrick at high speed on a coral shelf was hull damage, equipment loss, and 6 weeks of repair. The consequence of not beaching her would have been total loss. After the war, the Navy revised its damage control doctrine. The changes were incremental, technical, buried in appendices to maintenance manuals. One change involved portable pumps. The destroyer allowance increased from 3 P60 units to 5, including 2 larger P500 units capable of 500 gallons per minute. The change was made after reviewing damage reports from ships like Kendrick, where pump failure directly threatened survival. Another change involved bulkhead construction. Frames in way of machinery spaces were reinforced with additional bracing, particularly in areas vulnerable to torpedo blast. The change added weight, reduced speed slightly, and cost more to manufacture. But it meant that bulkheads might hold a few minutes longer under stress, and a few minutes could mean the difference between salvage and loss. These changes are listed in Bureau of Ships Circular Letter 1944-316, Section 9, Paragraph 4. The circular does not mention Kendrick by name. It mentions lessons learned from combat damage incidents in the Solomon Islands campaign, February through May 1943. Kendrick is included in that summary. So is every other destroyer that took torpedo damage and survived or did not survive, that had bulkheads that held or did not hold, that made it to port or sank en route. The bureaucracy learns slowly, but it learns. The lesson from Kendrick was simple. When conventional options fail, unconventional options become necessary. The corollary lesson: design ships so that unconventional options are more likely to succeed. The tide was high at 07:15. The stern rose 3 inches. The bow settled 2 inches. The ship groaned, a long, low sound that carried through the hull. The men in the after-engine room heard it and understood it. The ship was adjusting to her new condition. She was no longer a mobile unit. She was a stationary object. Her purpose had changed from delivering ordnance to not sinking. Halvorsen stood on the bridge and watched the waterline. It was stable. The pumps were still running. The bulkhead was still holding. The weather was clear, no storms forecast. A repair barge would arrive from Tulagi in 3 hours. Divers would arrive in 6. Salvage assessment would begin by evening. He had his ship, damaged, grounded, out of commission for months. But he had her. Graves appeared on the bridge. His face was tired. He'd been below, supervising damage control, coordinating with engineering, ensuring that every space was accounted for and every man was where he needed to be. "She's stable," Graves said. Halvorsen nodded. The bulkhead's cracked, but it's not leaking. Engineering thinks it'll hold indefinitely as long as we don't move her. Good. Graves hesitated. Sir, I need to apologize. No, you don't. I do. I argued against the beaching. I was wrong. Halvorsen looked at him. You argued for Tulagi because you believed the bulkhead would hold. That was reasonable. But it wouldn't have held. We don't know that. Maybe it would have. Maybe we'd have made it to Tulagi and docked safely and had her repaired in 3 weeks instead of 6. Maybe your plan was better. But you didn't think so. No, I thought the bulkhead would fail. I thought we had 20 minutes at most. I thought the only way to save her was to put her somewhere we could work on her, even if she flooded completely. Halvorsen paused. I made a guess. It happened to be right. That doesn't mean it was the only right answer. Graves shook his head. With respect, sir, it wasn't a guess. You read the damage reports. You knew what happened to Bristol and Beatty. You calculated the odds. I calculated wrong, Halvorsen said. I thought we had 20 minutes. Turns out we had maybe 15. If the coral shelf had been 100 yards farther away, we wouldn't have made it. But we did make it. We did, Halvorsen agreed, because the chart was accurate and the pumps kept running and the helmsman hit the right spot and the coral had the right profile and the bulkhead held long enough. A lot of things had to go right. They went right because you made them go right. Halvorsen didn't respond to that. He looked at the island, at the coral shelf, at the ship grounded on it. He thought about the arithmetic, the odds, the margin of error. He thought about the men in the forward fireroom who'd kept the pumps running, the helmsman who'd executed a hard turn at 19 knots without hesitation, the bulkhead that had held, despite forces it was never designed to withstand. We got lucky, he said finally. Graves didn't argue. The sun rose higher. The mist burned off. The water turned blue-green, clear enough to see the coral 10 feet down, the sand 20 feet down, the shadow of the hull resting on it. The ship was silent now, no turbines, no blowers, just the sound of pumps and generators and men working. By noon, the repair barge had arrived. By evening, divers were surveying the bottom. By midnight, the salvage plan was drafted. It would take 3 weeks to prepare the ship for refloating, another 3 weeks to tow her to Espiritu Santo, 6 weeks to repair her properly. In that time, the war moved forward. Other ships were damaged. Other captains made decisions. Other crews ran pumps and patched leaks and fought to keep their vessels afloat. Some succeeded. Some did not. Kendrick's name appears in the casualty lists under damaged, salvaged, not sunk, not lost, salvaged. The word means recovered, restored, returned to service. It means someone decided the ship was worth saving and took actions that made saving her possible. The actions weren't in the manual, but they worked. Years later, after the war, after Halvorsen had retired with the rank of captain and returned to civilian life, a naval historian interviewed him about the Rendova incident. The interview was recorded and is preserved at the Naval History and Heritage Command Archives in Washington, D.C. The historian asked, "Did you know the beaching would work?" Halvorsen answered, "No." "But you did it anyway?" "I did it because every other option was worse. You risked destroying the ship to save it. I risked destroying it on my terms instead of letting the sea destroy it on its terms. That's not the same thing." Some of your officers disagreed with the decision. One did. Graves, good officer. He wanted to run for Tulagi. If I'd chosen that course and we'd made it, he'd have been right and I'd have been wrong. If I'd chosen it and we'd sunk, we'd both have been wrong. I chose to beach because I thought it gave us the best chance. I was lucky to be right. You keep saying lucky. Because I was. The coral was where the chart said it would be. The pumps ran. The bulkhead held. If any one of those things had failed, I'd have grounded a perfectly good destroyer for nothing and probably faced a court-martial for destruction of naval property. But none of those things failed. No, none of them failed. We got lucky. The historian paused the recorder, thought for a moment, started it again. Do you think other officers would have made the same decision? Halvorsen considered the question. Some would, some wouldn't. It depends on how they calculate risk. If you think the worst outcome is making a mistake, you'll follow procedure even when procedure won't work. If you think the worst outcome is losing the ship, you'll try anything that might save her. Which kind of officer are you? The second kind, Halvorsen said. Always have been. The coral shelf off Rendova Island is still there. The water depth is still approximately 60 feet at the point where Kendrick grounded. The coral has grown in the 80 years since the incident. The profile has changed, but the shelf remains stable, shallow enough to stand a destroyer on, deep enough to float her free when the time comes. The ship is gone, scrapped decades ago. The men are gone, most of them, claimed by time if not by war. The decisions they made are preserved in reports, in damage control logs, in fitness evaluations, in the dry technical language of bureaucracy. What remains is the arithmetic. 1,500 feet or 60 feet, run or beach, procedure or improvisation, the choice between certain loss and possible salvage. Halvorsen chose salvage. He put his ship on coral at 19 knots, buried the bow, stopped the sinking, and saved her. The method was unconventional. The result was preservation. That's the story. A torpedo, a bulkhead, 3 pumps, a coral shelf, and a captain who calculated the odds and made a decision that wasn't in any manual, because manuals don't account for situations where all the answers are wrong, and you have to choose the least wrong answer and make it work. He chose. It worked. The ship survived. The rest is just arithmetic.